Hey, 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 welcome to the Prophecy Roundtable, where we promise an insightful and entertaining chat about the end times, but that's as far as our promise goes. We're going to have a really good time tonight. We're going to talk about that man-child in Revelation 12. Was Jesus raptured? Ooh, this should be a lot of fun. Okay. Now, some ground rules here. We don't all agree, but that's what makes it an interesting conversation, right? Because if we all agreed with each other, you'd be like, yeah, this is boring. What else is on? But we're going to take a look at that passage. And all right, we have some different views, and that's okay. We're okay with that. So we're going to open up the floor and to help not only moderate, but to give us some fantastic ideas here. We have the amazing Chris Steinley joining us. So, Chris, so glad that you could be with us to help bring some insight into this interesting passage. So, what we agreed to do, and we're not debating, we're just chatting. I'm going to read the passage, and then we're just going to kind of open it up and talk about it. So, let's go ahead and do that. Now, a great sign appeared in heaven: a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then, being with child, she cried out in labor and gave to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven: behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail drew a third of the stars of heaven, and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth, to devour her child as soon as it was born. She bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God that she should feed there 1,260 days. All right. Well, this should be a lot of fun. I'm persuaded that the child is Jesus, but I want to hear other perspectives here. So I don't want to do all the talking. Chris, why don't you kind of give us your perspective if you want to right now, or we can let Scott take. I don't know.
Scott, go ahead, because I'm actually looking something up.
All right, Scott, you got it.
I was going to just totally agree with Doug. I have nothing to say.
Whatever. Liar.
Not a liar. I'm a teaser. So let's, if you could, Doug, pull up the passage real quick again. Let me get full screen so I'll be able to read it while I'm. So can we, the three of us anyway, the three of us all agree that the woman is Israel?
Yes. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yes.
So, and Doug, you, I think this actually was one of our very first shows when we discussed who was or who is the woman in Revelation 12 when we had Dr. Kirshen on. That was quite some time ago when we had him on. And I think it kind of caught him off guard, the arguments we were making with Commonwealth theology. He really had never even heard some of the things that we were bringing out. And I wouldn't say arguments, just some of the scriptures we were pointing to. Dr. Kirshner, who has a PhD and is very, very knowledgeable, you could tell he really didn't know what to think about what the two of us were communicating. And obviously Chris is our culprit in crime here, because he has also helped co-author this book on Commonwealth theology. And it is a unique, I would say unique, I think it's ancient paradigm, actually, as far as how to look at scripture, as far as this restored whole house of Israel. And so with the three of us all agreeing and aligning that the woman is and was and always will be Israel, we're going to take a look at this man-child. And so, Doug, if you could pull up the passage again, and we're going to look at some typologies in which I concur. Yeshua definitely fits this man-child. And there's no doubt that Yeshua, as the king, will actually rule the nations with a rod of iron. But we see from typology, we see that this man-child is not only Yeshua. We see an example with the typology of Moses and how Moses, similar to Yeshua, and in this pattern that we see here in scripture, where the dragon, the beast, Satan, if you will, typified by Pharaoh, back at prior to the Exodus, when it was Pharaoh who was trying to kill and all the Hebrew children, all the Hebrew males. And then Moses was obviously hidden in an ark, placed in the water, and then drawn out from the water. And we do see that Moses was a type of ruler and reigner over Israel, who was and is the woman. Same thing with, we see the same thing with Yeshua. Obviously Herod, who is a type of Antichrist, a type of beast, that in order to prevent God's redemptive plan from coming to fruition, there was another scheme, if you will, to try to eliminate this seed of the woman, Israel. It's not this, the woman is not Mary, and I think that's why it's a good argument that the man child is not Yeshua. It's not Jesus. So there, but he certainly is a type of this man child. And I think if we go to Revelation 2, maybe verse 26, Doug, and I'll make the connection here with this, with who the overcomers, if you will rule and reign. And there's other passages too, where Paul, he doesn't allude to this, he flat out says it. You know, and now I say to you, and this is obviously the letter to Thyatira, the fourth, I believe this is the fourth letter to the fourth assembly. I will put on you the burden, but hold fast what you have till I come. And he who overcomes and keeps my works until the end, to him I will give power over the nations. He shall rule them with a rod of iron. They shall be dashed to pieces like the potter's vessels. I have also received from my Father, and will give him the morning star. So again, I believe that these overcomers, the bride, if you will, this chosen, many are called, few are chosen, will be these overcomers who actually do rule and reign with the Messiah, govern with him throughout the I guess what I like to call the seventh day, now the Sabbath day, the millennium, and will actually sit on I believe that gets a lot deeper than what we're talking about right now, but actually be part of the great white throne judgment at the very end of this age, the next stage prior to going to the eighth day. But so I believe the man child is a select group of believers who, and if we could look at Isaiah 66, I forget the passage, but it talks about, I forget the verse, but it talks about how a male child is born prior to tribulation, which is very, very interesting and intriguing. I brought it up in past shows, and we have never done like an in-depth show on it. But there it is. Before she was in labor, she gave birth. Before her pain came, she delivered a male child. And there it is in our, I guess, the word. They've even got Revelation 12:5 listed as a reference. So what's going on with this male child? I don't think that's Yeshua, but because if we look in these passages of Isaiah 65 and 66, I believe those are more passages related to his second coming as the king, as opposed to his first coming as the suffering servant, as Messiah ben Yosef, as the Lamb. So anyway, y'all chime in. I've said a lot.
All right. Well, so let's go to another passage, because what Revelation is quoting from is, of course, Psalm 2. Why do the nations rage and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves together, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, right, as Mashiach, saying, let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens shall laugh, the Lord shall hold them in derision, etc. He says, yet I have set my king on my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord has said to me, you are my son. Today I've begotten you. Sounds like Messiah. Ask of me, and I'll give you the nations for your inheritance and the ends of the earth for your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. All right, so that is the original citation, obviously, that Jesus himself is quoting in the book of Revelation, but it's coming right here, which is talking about what this male child is going to do. All right. So, Scott, I see your points. I think they're interesting, and they're good. All right. I'm not discounting them. I'm just not agreeing.
Well, but who
You know.
rules with Messiah? Who
hold on. Wait a second.
is part of that scepter?
It's my turn right here.
I know. I'm just asking you a question.
I know, Mr. Lawyer, but I can lawyer you back. And
no.
I
didn't ask him. I did not ask
so,
you
wait
a
a second.
leading question.
Wait, Scott. Let me finish. All right. So, So she bore a male child. I agree. This is Israel, right? And I would suggest that the male child that was caught up to God and to his throne. Okay, so this is where we're going to look at this word, right? I think this is where it gets, a little bit exciting. Is talking about this particular word, and Chris is going to help us with this really interesting perspective. Yes. Okay. Right. So he was caught up. Right. Here we.
Harpaste.
Yeah. Thank you. Harpaste. All right. So, or harpaste. All right. So he was caught up. Right now, where was somebody potentially caught up? Well, let's see if I go back to Acts chapter 1. That is where we actually have Jesus who ascends to the heaven. Right. In fact, let me just go back really quick there.
Not the same word now.
That's all right.
Not the same word.
Hold on. And her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Okay. So we'll go back to Acts chapter 1. And, Jesus, of course. Hold on, Scott. Just
I know it's a different word is all I'm saying, dude. It's
okay.
not. It's like orge and tribulation. They're not the same. They're not synonyms.
All right. I'm fine with that. All right. So now when he had spoken these things while they watched, he was taken up and a cloud received him out of their sight. Right. And, men of Galilee, why are you gazing up into the heaven? This same Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven will so come in like manner as you saw him go into heaven. All right. So that's what I would suggest, that this is the male child that was caught, that was past tense, caught up into heaven. This is talking about Jesus, who was indeed caught up into the heavenlies, if we will, okay, wherever that heavenly, well, ultimately to God's throne. We know from Acts chapter 4 that he was taken up into, he's at the right hand of the Majesty on high, right? He's standing there, right? So we know he's at God's throne. So that's how I would see it. So, yeah. Chris, it's now your turn.
Yeah, go ahead and pull up Acts chapter 3, verse 21.
Hold on, Scott.
Before we do that, can we look at the actual Greek word?
We'll get back to that.
You're saying caught up, and I'm saying it's a different word for ascended.
Well, let's let Chris have a moment here.
Okay.
All right. So, Chris, 3 what?
Where are we here? Yeah, verse 21.
There we go.
Okay. Whom heaven must receive until the times of restoration of all things. So, and to start out in 20, that he may send, and the idea there is send from heaven based on verse 21, Jesus Christ, who was preached to you before, whom heaven must receive until the times of restoration of all things. So I think this helps fill out where he was taken up to. And it should be obvious, but yeah. Okay, let's look at the Greek there in Acts chapter 1. Let's see if I can get there.
All right, I've got it on the screen for what it's worth. All right. Do you have which verse are you looking for, Chris?
Yeah. Is it
1:9?
A perthe.
Okay.
Yeah, verse 9.
Yes. Okay.
Aperthe is the word harpazo.
It's not harpazo in that it's not even
Neither is
close.
the other one. The other one is hair harpasthe. Neither one of them are exactly harpazo, because that's the the infinitive, basically the lexicon word that all these other words are based on. And so the Greek changes form to reflect who, when, and why type thing. And so the form, the exact spelling of the words in Greek change, but the stem remains the same.
Sitting here, I mean, I'm no Greek scholar, obviously, but what's stem?
The stem is harpazo. The stem is harpox, basically, the word these things are derived from.
What would that be in Strong's? I'm sitting here looking. Would that be 1909 or G142?
I don't.
Because I'm looking at again, BLB is by no means
I have the Greek.
Yeah, it's by no means the be all and end all. But according to this, the root word etymology is from 1909 and G142. And this is like a lifting up, exalting, take up, hoisted up.
Yeah.
Versus a snatching or a seizing.
Okay. It's the same word. And there's
but it's not.
Yeah, there's no up in either of these, in any of these words. That's inferred by the context.
Yeah, the up is a very American or English type thing where we put on these extra little prepositions to, to go down versus having a word to say that, right? Or to come up, right? And that's very much something that we add in English. That's not always reflected in the Greek by any means.
And here's something that certainly is a parallel with what we see in 1 Thessalonians 4:17 is there is a cloud. There is an ascension. Like you just said, the up is not necessarily there, but there is an ascension. There is a lifting off the earth into a cloud. Now, whether that's a literal cloud, I believe it is, and a spiritual cloud, which I believe it is. It's like that veil between what we can now see, as opposed to where Yeshua is at this time. He went into the cloud, and that's where he is to this day, in that heavenly realm at the throne beside the Father. And I just don't think it's that far away. I mean, we think of the heavens and we think of billions of light years, and don't want to get off on a flat Earth tangent, but heaven, third heaven, even could be just literally at cloud level, and us just not even be able to at this point in time see it or realize it or experience it. So that's a parallel between where Yeshua did ascend to, and where in 1 Thessalonians 4:17, after we are transformed or plundered, we will then be caught to the cloud, the same location, same cloud that followed Israel around in the wilderness, same cloud at the baptism.
Yeah. Okay, so I think Chris and I are kind of making the argument that the male child is Yeshua. Who would you say is the male child? If it's not Yeshua, Scott, who do you think it is?
I think it's the overcomers. I think it could be the 144,000, which I don't believe is just an exact number. I think it's more representative.
So how would they be born in a day before the
not born? Not if we're talking physical. No.
Well, I don't know. I'm just taking the passage that you took.
Well, I know, Isaiah 66. How are we? How are we born again? Are we actually born again? Did we enter our mother's womb?
Well,
I mean, I'm asking you, Nicodemus.
No, you explain it. You're the one that made the argument, so make the case. I mean, I'm just.
Well, again, how? Same argument. Can I fully explain how a grown man can be born again? No, but I can read John 3 and I can understand the spiritual nature of that. And so, could it be that there will be, prior to the final 3.5 years, prior to the Great Tribulation, there will be a selection process of overcomers of, if you would, a special ops team who are sealed, who are actually maybe caught away, caught up, gathered, if you will, but remain in their mortal bodies. Much like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were protected through the fire, much like Lot was taken out of the danger, but I think that's more wrath at the very end. But I do see that there could be, and it's just something I've been mulling over, and I'm hearing it from more and more teachers who really don't even want to go there because it starts to lead you back into this pre-tribulation rapture nonsense. But there could be this sealing, protecting of a number who will be, and again, the 144,000. And Doug, you've got great arguments as to why Revelation is thematic. Okay. I align with that now completely. A video I watched recently, I'm going to go and plug him right now, and I would encourage everybody to go out there and watch this 4-part series, is by a Dr. Tony Robinson on the chiastic view of Revelation. And then he spends a lot more time than I will be able to do so this evening, breaking down in parts 2, 3, and 4 of that series about the woman and the man-child. And so I would highly encourage that, but it's not just me that's been seeing this over the past year or two. It's others that are not, they're not dispensationalists. They fully understand that the elect are in the restored whole house of Israel, made up of both Judah and Israel. There's not going to be some we get out of here early rapture party type thing,
Mm-hmm.
but they're all seeing this same. And again, I don't know how anybody deals. It's just it's an interesting passage over in Isaiah 66. Before the tribulation, before the birth pangs, there's a male child born.
I have kind of a two-part answer. Yeah.
Go for it. Go for it.
And it does say male child. It doesn't say children. So that in itself would lead me to believe that this is Yeshua we're talking about. Now, to comment on the things you were just talking about, Jesus must remain in heaven according to 1 Corinthians chapter 15 until all enemies are put under Jesus' feet. And it's an interesting language there because it doesn't say until Jesus puts all these enemies under his feet. And so there are agents carrying out his will. And one of those is Michael, the archangel. So in chapter 12 of Revelation, you've got Michael who overcomes and binds Satan. Now that lines up with what happens in Revelation chapter 20. They're at the beginning, bound for 1,000 years. However, so because of the thematic nature of Revelation, this happens back there. And at that time is when death is subdued also. And so that paves the way then for the resurrection of the dead, because death is overcome and Satan's the one binding death, we see in Hebrews. But now it's the same basically time, if you want to think of time in Revelation, that the chosen, the elect, are sealed, and that sealing causes them to be impervious even though they're still on the earth. So I think this all kind of lines up with what you're saying. I'm envisioning this as kind of how this is going down.
Okay.
Yeah, again, I don't think that Satan is yet been thrown down to earth. We are not in the Great Tribulation yet.
I totally agree. I think we all agree on that.
I agree with that. Yes.
And when we start reading this passage again and just read it and let the text say what it says, I think there's been a lot of translation bias here. I mean, pull it. There you go. You got a capital C. I mean, you got the translators just screaming in your head, this is Yeshua, this is Jesus.
Sure.
They're capitalizing child. And
I agree with you.
Yeah, and so they have decided for us who this male child is, and 99% never really even think about it. But But look at his tail drew a third of the stars of heaven through the earth, and the dragon stood before the woman. Well, that did not happen almost 2,000 years ago. That I'm sorry, he is still right now accusing us before the brethren. He's still running around to and fro, God of this age, going up into the heavens, just like he did to Job. Have you considered Scott? Please do not consider Scott. I don't want the attention. Yeah, but that's exactly what he's doing right now. He has not been cast down the earth yet. And so if we just look at this passage, unless we just try to take the generally accepted answer, there's some major problems with trying to make this child Yeshua. There just is.
I think there's major problems with every interpretation, but I think it being Yeshua is the least problematic. I mean, look, the language is what it is, right? It's kind of challenging, right, to work through this. There's no question about that, right? So we have this other sign, the fire-red dragon, right? So in corrupting image 2, I show that is, obviously Satan. I don't think anyone was questioning that. So whatever. But the point here, right? So, we're getting descriptions of, who he is, what he does. The dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child as soon as it was born. So I would suggest that if we go back and we think about how, Herod tried to kill specifically Jesus, and of course all the other under 2-year-olds in Bethlehem, that seems like he was really trying to devour her child as soon as it was born. Okay, so that I would say did happen historically.
But what about the preceding sentence in verse 4? His tail drew a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. Are you saying that happened almost 2,000?
No.
Well, this would have been over 2,000 years ago. This would have been 2025-ish years ago.
I hear what you're saying. I know
what you're saying. And again, I'm going to do this right now, Doug. So you're going to pick and choose here and then ignore there. And I don't think that's a good hermeneutic.
Well, the way I would understand it is it's being descriptive of who the dragon is. Okay, so it's not necessarily that has already happened. But I see your point, and I acknowledge your point, and I think you should get a point for that. Okay, but I'm going to stick with my point that I think
to win. This is not winning. This is just a discussion.
We're just having fun. We're just having fun.
All right. How about
referee, go for it.
Yeah,
Chris, go for
it. Consider that before Christ was born, and really beginning, we know a third of the angels were cast down to earth before Jesus was born. Now, I know it was a long time before, but nevertheless, it qualifies. They were thrown down before.
Interesting. So I guess the question then is, thrown down to the earth, does that mean that they were, in some sense, physically thrown, like they're now on the earth, or were did they join Satan's ranks? I remember reading this book called The Way of the Shaman. I read it because somebody I know was getting into it, and then I was like, I think I'll read this because it sounds interesting, and I want to see what he's up to. And I think I believed it more than he did. The long story short here is that this guy who went on an ayahuasca trip in South America, he had this trip, and in his trip, what's the better word? His hallucination, whatever this thing is, he came to the point so close to death that he saw in this kind of vision type thing, there were all these stars that were falling to earth, and they came down, and then they talked to him, and they said, we came down here to flee from our enemy who's up there, right? And so he had this whole description. So this guy was really freaked out about it. So he went to the local missionary after he came up out of the ayahuasca trip, and the missionary took him to Revelation chapter 12, and he's like, oh yeah, they're always saying that, but these are essentially demons who are saying that we are now the rulers of the earth, but we had to come down here to flee from our arch enemy, who is of course God, right? So I thought it was really interesting, so if we submit that piece of evidence, in this whole quest to interpret this, that would suggest, by their admission in this book on the way of the shaman, that they're saying that, yeah, we actually did come down here. So it's interesting, to at least consider that perspective.
So she gives birth to a son, a male, who's going to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. I think everybody would agree that we are going to reign and rule with.
I would agree with that. Yes.
So child's called up to the throne. Again, this is not pre-tribulation rapture resurrection nonsense, but this is what's interesting. So we're kind of looking, so the woman then flees into the wilderness. So we know we all agree, the three of us all agree that the woman is Israel. And then there's where she had a place prepared for by God so that she would be nourished for the 1,260 days, which I think all the three of us would all agree that's sort of the final 3.5 years, 42 months of this age. So this is all yet, I would say, that we would all be in alignment that this is yet future. And so again, I think that if we're going to look at this passage and look at it as still this part of it being future, not that some things have not been fulfilled in the past, but if we're going to look at this text as a future fulfillment, then the timing says that this male child is birthed by Israel, like a special child birth. And again, perhaps that this male child, and we get into it like the two witnesses, Doug, what if this male child is just one male child, like a Moses ruler at the end that's called up and is supernaturally empowered to come back and lead Israel? That's one of these two witnesses. And that's something I had not even thought about until just then.
I don't know that.
No, but you've got
why
these
introduce
two
new
X-Men.
characters?
Well, again, Moses, what patterns, if we're looking at the typology, if we're looking at what's
But what about Psalm 2? Psalm 2.
Again, we are going to rule and reign with Yeshua. Okay. So I'm not trying to take him off the throne, okay? But he's got a bride, he's got a queen, if you will, and not Mary. So he's got a co-ruler, and so whether nobody denies that. I mean, I could sit here and proof text you with like 10 or 15 different passages where we are going to rule and reign with him. I'm not trying to take Yeshua off the throne. I'm just saying that this rod that he may be ruling with, that rod, what if that rod is the bride? What if it's this male child that he's delegating his authority to, if you will? So,
well,
yeah.
Anyway.
So let's go to Daniel chapter 7, because I think this has very, very, very similar themes. Okay, so I was watching the night visions. Behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven, and he came to the Ancient Days. They brought him near before him. To him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. Now, I think that this Son of Man here, I think we're in agreement. This is Yeshua, okay? And he is going to be the one who is given dominion. Now, to your point, Scott, I see your point. I really do. Okay, because now we're talking later about the saints, right? That the horn is prevailing against the saints until the Ancient of Days came, etc. He's going to persecute the saints. The court shall be seated. They shall take away his dominion and consume and destroy it forever. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. All right, so it's going to be given to the people, yes, but it's also given to him. So this is where we become co-rulers with Yeshua, right? But I think it would be a disservice to suggest that the child is not Jesus, that it's somehow the 144,000. I agree that we are going to rule with Jesus. Revelation 20 absolutely positively says that we're going to rule and reign with him. So we know that is our destiny, but we can't take away the him part, right? That it's the Jesus, the Jesus part is at the center of this whole thing. And I think Psalm chapter 2 really defines who this is, that he, the Messiah, who is also the Son, is the one who is going to be ruling with and reigning with a rod of iron, right? And then we will also join him in that ruling and reigning with a rod of iron. But I'm still very convinced that the child is Yeshua. But let's have Chris have the floor here.
Okay. Doug, if you'd pull up 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and starting in verse 24, you get a parallel verse to what we just read in Daniel about the kingdom being handed over to the people. And so, but when he says all things are put under him, it is evident that he put all things under him is accepted. Now, in verse 28, when all things are made subject to him, then the Son himself will also be subject to him who put all things under him, that God may be all in all. And so this is the idea that Christ is all authority in heaven and earth given to him, all his enemies destroyed, and then him allowing the kingdom to be not just the king, but the kingdom there, all in all. It's a spiritual look at what's happening there.
Yeah, Scott.
Speaking of Revelation, let's go to Revelation 5:10.
What was the reference again?
Revelation 5:10. Chapter 5, verse 10.
All right. And have made us kings
and
priests to our God, and we shall reign on the earth.
So again, I'm not trying to get Yeshua off the throne, guys. Okay.
Well, we know.
I'm just saying that this male child is I'm up to the, again, Tony Robinson, it's Dr. Tony Robinson. He does a good job teaching it. Curtis and my buddies Curtis and Michael have some great teachings on the rod of Elohim and on the great white throne judgment. Really, really, really like going through like 7-part series, if you will, and showing that this rod, that this scepter that Yeshua will reign with is us. It's going to be his bride. Not everybody in the kingdom, not this communist socialism view we inherited from the church, that everybody that is justified is going to be chosen as the bride, but a select, and I'm not saying right now I deserve to be like a fly, maybe at best, flying around trying to get some dinner at the wedding hall. But what I'm getting at is what we've been taught is a communist socialist version of the kingdom. And there will be a hierarchy there, and there will be favorites. And I believe there will be a chosen select few who will be ruling and reigning, and it won't necessarily be everybody in the kingdom. And I'm not the one making that decision, guys. That's the Father, Son that makes that decision. So
of course,
don't think that I'm not worthy. So
let's go to Revelation 19. I think this will help us hopefully put this to bed. All right, so let's back up just a little bit right here. So here comes Yeshua, right? And I saw the heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. His eyes were like a flame of fire. On his head were many crowns. He had a name written that no one knew except himself. He was clothed with a robe dipped in blood. His name was called the Word of God. And the armies of heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, followed him on white horses. Now out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, that with it he should strike the nations, and he himself will rule them with a rod of iron. He himself treads the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of Almighty God. And he has on his robe and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. I don't know. To me, that really seems like that nails it, that is Yeshua. He's the one who's going to rule with a rod of iron. And we're going to rule with him. I agree. We're going to rule with him.
That's the point. Have you ever done a deep dive, Doug, Dr. Hamp, or Chris, by the way, this is for both of you, on what is that rod? Have you ever really studied that out and tested it out? And by the way, if you do, I think you will arrive at the same place as some of my other friends. I respect the two of you a lot, by the way. No, seriously. And I respect what they did. And it's thinking outside the little box, the theological box we were trained in. But that rod of Elohim, that rod he will rule with, is this elect, select few, the overcomers, the bride, if you will. So I'm not differing with you. I'm saying that rod that he rules with, I'm not going to put it as us, because I don't necessarily think I'm part of that. Maybe it's you, Doug. Maybe it's you, Chris, because I don't think I'm
actually
worthy.
All we have to do is go to Revelation, flip the page and go to Revelation 20 and look at verses 5 and 6 there, and maybe 7. Not sure where that begins. Yeah, but the rest of the dead, it's talking about the first resurrection, guys, right. And so, but the rest of the dead did not live again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he who is part of the first resurrection. Over such, let's see, where are we now? Yeah, they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. Now, we know that it also says the rest of the dead didn't rise. Yet only these guys.
I think that's the bride. I don't think that's everybody that's going to make it into eternity.
They were beheaded.
Well, what I'm saying is the second, that's a totally different topic for another day. But
what?
But this second resurrection, everybody that gets resurrected, do you think everybody's going to go to the lake of fire?
Resurrection.
No. I'm talking about the second one right now. Everybody that misses the first resurrection, that's not part of this ruling and reigning party, okay? Do you think every one of them that miss out on ruling and reigning during the seventh day, what we call the millennium, do you think every one of those that do not get raised in the first resurrection are destined for the lake of fire?
Well, we just know blessed and holy are the ones that do.
We want to be part of that first resurrection, correct? The question is...
Yeah, I think everybody who's ever been faithful to God, is part of the first resurrection. I can't imagine that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob don't get to be part of the... I
think they're one of the 24 elders already sitting up there.
That's speculation. We absolutely do not know that.
We do know people were resurrected in Matthew.
Sure, I know, but we don't know who. I mean,
we don't know who, but I would bet you it's Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Daniel, Ezekiel. Maybe it's that. Maybe Hebrews 11 might tell us something about who it is.
Yeah, what is it? Gideon going to be part of that?
Could be.
That would be ironic if Gideon. That would be very ironic.
Samson could be.
Wow, that's a sorry lot.
It's not how you start, Doug. It's
God set the bar pretty low.
It's how you finish.
Well, yeah. I mean, but that's all speculation. Okay, so we really have no idea on the identity of who the 24 elders are. But I just can't even imagine that Adam, Noah, all the greats, and even the the mediocres that have ever loved God are not going to be part of the millennial kingdom, right? I don't know. So as far as I'm concerned, the first resurrection includes everybody who's ever lived that had some fidelity toward God, right? And we'll let him be the judge as to where that bar is, but they were God friendly, and he had their eye on them. Okay.
And included in those are those who were beheaded for their faith.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. We have an idea. Question from Gavin.
I am so far away from being a dominionist that it's sick, and I don't know where Gavin's coming from on this. We'll have to have him come on and talk about where in the world he is seeing any dominionism or new apostolic Reformation teaching from me.
I think maybe what he's getting at is the Laodicean idea of a hierarchical rulership in between the Lord and ourselves. I think maybe that's where he was going for.
It could be, but I'm talking about after the resurrection, Chris. In other words, I'm not talking about any dominionism during this age. I'm talking about next stage.
I'm just
and there will be a hierarchy. There will be rewards. I'm gonna get away from me, everybody. Doug, Chris, my friends. When I go in front of the Bema seat, back up. There's going to be a bonfire. Okay. And everything I've done in the flesh and anything like that is going to burn, baby, burn. But the little bitty bit that I might have done correctly in the spirit is going to be is going to make it through, and that's where we're going to get our rewards. This communism, everybody is equal in the kingdom, is nonsense. It just is. If you think, if anybody here thinks that they are as worthy as say the Apostle Paul. And I'm not saying nobody is not his equal, but I'm not. I haven't suffered like Paul did for the kingdom.
Well, I think this is where Jesus talks about two different kinds of parables, right? There's one where everybody gets very much a communist thing where, the guy that worked 1 hour gets the same pay as the guy that worked whatever 12 hours.
It's in the kingdom.
They're like, this isn't fair. They're like, well, I can do what I want. Okay. Yeah. But then we also have the parable of the talents. Right. And the man who was faithful with much is rewarded with much. So I think the one where everybody gets in regardless of how much they worked is salvation, right? That is a free gift. God can give it to everybody, whether they endured a long time or a short time, it doesn't matter. That's just a given. But then as to how I've lived my life and whether, whatever he gave me, did I do something with that? Then I get a greater reward. If I didn't, I kind of squandered it, then I get maybe no reward. So that's what I would suggest. So I think it's communist on one level that everybody can get in by the grace of God, but then it's very much a works-oriented situation when it comes to your rewards. Okay.
And I picked this up. I like the saying is there will be many that are surprised about how large the kingdom is. And then of those in the kingdom, they're going to be really, really shocked at how many are the bride. So, and I tend to agree with what some of my other brothers and testing out their teachings on that many are called, few are chosen. Those depart from me, I never knew you. They aren't necessarily not in the kingdom. They're just not part of the bridal party, and they're weeping and gnashing their teeth, not because they're cast into Gehenna or the lake of fire.
Hey, Chris, jump in anytime here.
No,
Chris.
I did. Yeah, I did, and I will.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I do agree. You see throughout the Bible, and especially Paul's writings, and Peter, the authority system and respect for authority all the way down, the chain here on earth. So there's no reason to think that that kingdom, especially rulership during the 1,000-year reign, isn't going to be like that. And that's why I pointed out 1 Corinthians chapter 15, because what Paul seems to be saying there is the same as what's said in Daniel chapter 7, that at some point the kingdom is handed over to the people. Now, does that mean there weren't any people in the kingdom before? No, he says he puts an end to all rule and all authority and power. And so somehow we're empowered and we are responding directly to the Godhead. And there is apparently no need to have an intercessor as far as authority control over us, because we're already doing the right thing. We're already living the life.
Yeah, I'm just looking at some of the questions here. I want to get to those before our time is up. So this is a question from the Creator's Universe. So at the time of Yeshua, his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven and did cast them to the earth. I think he had a previous part to his question, but Well,
You
I
know,
mean, again, I think that's part of the difficulty in understanding that this vision, right? That this great vision that he saw, right? We're trying to identify who are these characters, okay, right? And we're all working with what we have. We know that Satan is the great dragon. The third of the stars represent the other angels. We see that in the latter part of Revelation chapter 12. The woman, we're all in agreement that is Israel, right? And so then the question is, well, who's the male child? You guys have heard Scott's position that it is more representative of some saints and whoever exactly they may be, but that's yet to be decided. I and Chris lean to the other side that it's more Messiah, right? And I think we all agree that we, the saints, are going to rule and reign with Yeshua at the end. We're all in agreement on that point. We're just trying to decide, okay, who is the male child? So, and exactly when are these cast to the earth? I think to some degree they've been cast they've cast in their lot with Satan, but I think there may also be more of a permanent casting to the earth in the age in the tribulation. But Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I would agree with that because we see Satan going back and forth now, but there's these demons are in the ether, so to speak, right now, and they will be more immortalized at some time in the future. We do know that when Jesus sent the 70 out, he said, "I see Satan cast down." So was he looking forward? Was he looking backward? Or did it happen back then and in the future? So it's really hard to say whether he was seeing it in the future, seeing it in the past, or at the moment that those 70 went out.
One sec. Well, so and you see that war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. Right. So then the great dragon was cast out. Right. So there seems to be some kind of a veil that he and his dudes are hiding behind, and he has some liberty to come and go at this point. But
just
then,
like Job.
Yes, and then at some point in the future, he will no longer have access to going behind the curtain, if you will.
And,
right?
and that's when his wrath is unleashed, because he no longer is able to make that accuser of the brethren. And I believe that's for this final 3.5 years, 42 months, what we call the Great Tribulation, and megathalipsis. So, it's I used to actually worry about that time period. I'm really not the least bit concerned. If we're getting close to there, I believe that if you have nothing to worry about from God. Now, could you get caught up in some type of Hitler-esque type of situation in which you get rounded up and executed? Yeah, but so what? Don't fear those who can kill the body. And as these end time events are winding down, people need to get serious about thinking about eternal consequences as opposed to protecting their life and their American lifestyle and what we've been taught, that we're going to avoid the tribulation, the 7-year tribulation, because we're getting raptured out of here.
Fair enough. Scott, this is kind of a question directed toward you, I think. Could the male child be the overcomer who is also the new 8th day man?
I don't know about the 8th day man. I'm not giving a thought of that, but Revelation, I think it was Revelation 2 earlier, verse 27. Is that was, if you could pull that back up real quick, Doug, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Because that's where I was headed with this. It is those who overcome. I think it's Revelation 2, 27, 28, somewhere around there.
Yep. Right. And he who overcomes and keeps my works until the end, to him I give the power over the nations.
Over the nations.
Rule. Right.
And so these overcomers do have this power. Now we only derive it from Yeshua. In other words, he's the king. Best case scenario, we're his bride / queen, ruling and reigning with him. We would only derive our authority as a result of what he gives us, if you will.
He's the sheriff. We're the deputies.
Yes. You know, he's the king. We're the queen. And in this hierarchy, the king is in charge. The queen is just we're like number one minion, if you will, but we're above all the other minions.
Okay.
So we're like special minions.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think the sheriff and deputy thing, because we are going to be literally deputized to do his bidding. Right. And that's what we see that the angels have right now. If you look in Daniel chapter 4, it was by decree of the watchers that Nebuchadnezzar had to go like a beast for 7 seasons. Right. They apparently were not like consulting with God. God told us to do this, but they had authority because God gave them authority. They're acting on God's authority, but God authorized them, deputized them to go and to do his bidding. And so I think we're gonna have that. So, you know, again, so Ingrid, in regard to your question, I would not suggest that the male child is the overcomer. However, to agree with Scott, I would suggest that we are going to also rule with a rod of iron as Yeshua is ruling with the rod of iron. So I would still identify the male child as being Yeshua rather than just the corporate representation. I think it's Yeshua, and then we get to enjoy those benefits. But I would say it's Yeshua.
And I pulled up Joe. It's interesting. Joe made this connection where this little horn, who a lot of people say it's the Antichrist. I'd rather just use the word little horn. Sure. And this little horn thing, and I think this is Daniel 8 where Joel's quoting from. And I like to say that where this is going on is in the heavenlies. This, the 2300, the daily, Sam's been on, and me and Sam have been going back and forth in emails about the 2300 and the daily and chapter 8. But it is interesting that the parallel between this and this little horn hurled some of the army and the stars to the ground. That's certainly not the Archangel Michael doing that from Revelation, but it is an interesting parallel. What are your thoughts, Doug and Chris, on that?
Yeah, well, I take a look at that in my book, Cryptic Image Volume 3, and what I suggest is that when the man, we'll call him the Antichrist for now, the man merges with Satan and becomes the beast. Okay, I think he is Antichrist in his outlook and his philosophy, and his worldview. But then he becomes the beast when he actually physically, genetically merges with Satan and becomes that avatar. And then I think this man who's now become divine, right? He has become a hybrid. He now has superpowers, and he can go and do things that a regular human cannot do. Right? So he's both man and Satan at the same time. And then he can go into the heavenlies. He can make war with Michael, and he's going to cast him to the ground. It's interesting, who is he casting to the ground? It seems to be demons, but then I don't know. Maybe there's something that's going on, right?
I think that this little horn, this is a spiritual entity. I believe it could be the destroyer, Apollyon, who's led out and starts to kick butt. And notice that it's the beast, and it's not Satan that gets cast in the lake of fire. It's almost like Satan's like, I'm gonna let you have my authority. And I'm gonna go to this abyss thing for 1,000 years, but I'm not the one getting cast in the lake of fire yet. I've still got a job to do at the end of the 7th day.
So you think Apollyon is the beast?
It could be, because we do know that Apollyon or Abaddon, and I don't do Greek and Hebrew, and you tease me and make fun of me, and I don't care. But this thing that is down there is still there right now, and he's going to get let out. And it is interesting that in Daniel 8, there's this little horn that arises and seems to be warring up in the heavenlies with some other bad dudes and kicks their butt. And there's a reason this destroyer, I believe it was the destroyer. People talk about it being the angel of the Lord. No, I believe it's his death angel. This thing that right now is under lock and key. He's got his Yah has his special ops version of really not good angels that carry out his plans. Satan only does what God allows him to do. He's got a pretty long leash right now, but he can't go any further then just like in the story of Job, he gave him a pretty big leash to kill and pillage his children and his property, but wouldn't let him kill Job. That's just Bible 101.
Chris.
All right. I like the New King James there, where it says he down to the earth. And so the idea there is like these sci-fi movies where you see the dragon or Lord of the Rings or whatever, and he's falling, but this tail whips up, and as he's going down, he whips his tail up, and he drew the third and got them out of the spiritual realm as well, and brought them down to earth with him. So that's the picture I get.
I'm just fascinated by that Daniel 8 passage. It's everybody's been focusing on what the 2300 days is here, and I just don't see any evidence. I'm not saying it won't manifest here on this earth, but that's some crazy, spooky, supernatural, up in the heavenly stuff going on there. So
absolutely, yeah. No, of course, we should spend more time in that whole passage, but not today. So this is a question from Gavin. Question: might the man-child be both the head and the body of Christ, each resurrected in their time?
Could be. I wouldn't say resurrected, but yeah, there is going to be two resurrections. There's going to be the first resurrection at the end of this age, at the beginning on that last day, that seventh day. John 6, I think Jesus quotes it 5 times. We see it in Revelation 6 times. About the 1,000 years, and then there's that second resurrection. So, I again, nobody wants to be part of that second resurrection, Gavin. I know I don't. I know you don't. I know it's sort of like the first resurrection. You're in like Flynn. You're golden. You might be a ditch digger in the kingdom, but at least you're in the kingdom, and there's no doubt about it.
So Joel Blackford has a comment. The Revelation 12 man-child is a human that will rule alongside Yeshua like King David. What proves this is Ezekiel 45, where the plural form of princes, I guess, is used. In Ezekiel 46, it appears that there is a human ruler also.
That would sort of be, again, this select elect, if you will. And it appears that this is chosen prior to the Great Tribulation, and that from Isaiah 66. Not a rapture, not a resurrection, not a transformation into an immortal state. Because there are people that teach that, by the way. There's a guy named, I'll go ahead and tell you, his name is Tim Foster, and he will hammer in and laser in on this passage, and he's still teaching a form of a pre-Great Tribulation rapture. Now, he's avoided the Daniel 70th week 7-year tribulation nonsense, but he will use this passage to teach that there will be a rapture and a transformation, a metamorphosis from the mortal to the immortal prior to the Great Tribulation. What I'm seeing is there's going to be potentially this gathering, this sealing. It could even be supernatural, but not a transformation into incorruptible until the end of the tribulation. So, but it gets complicated, guys. When you really start studying this, and when you stop just regurgitating what you learned from Hal Lindsey and what you read in Tim LaHaye's books, and you actually start digging into the passages, and you start doing a show like this, and it's easy to sit there behind the keyboard and snipe, because I do it too, and I'm guilty of it. But when you start doing this and you see how complicated some of this is and how in depth it is, you get a lot more wiggly, Gavin.
Well, it's like putting a puzzle together. You think you have a piece that fits over here, but if you put it there, then this other one and 10 others aren't going to fit properly, right? So in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, okay, if I make this piece fit over here, what about all these other things? And they all have to fit together. And that's the complication. And we're all doing our best to try to put this gigantic puzzle together. And it's kind of fun. On this topic, I would still go back to this child is going to rule with a rod of iron. Okay, and I think we see two passages, Psalm chapter 2, we see Revelation chapter 19, that clearly identify Yeshua as the one who's going to rule with and reign with a rod of iron. We also see that he, the child, was caught up to the Father, right? And we see that, I think it's quite clear in Acts chapter 1 that he was indeed caught up to the Father. All right. So, from my perspective, I would say that the male child is Yeshua. Do we become part of it? Do we join into the dominion that he's going to bestow upon us? Yes, absolutely. And that's an amazing thing. But I would not identify the male child as the believers at large or even a small subgroup of them. But I would say it is indeed Yeshua. Chris, what are your concluding thoughts here?
The word points out to us in several places that we get to rule and reign with him. And so it's not detracting from these other verses that you just quoted, specifying him individually, and I believe as the child, as again, it's not in the plural there. So that's my take.
Awesome. We got another question from Gavin. He says, is not Michael up in the second heaven, master at arms for Israel, kicking out the angels of the rebellion in the days of the end time cosmic signs, the blood moon, and the falling stars?
I'd say,
I would agree with that.
I think Michael is the restrainer. He's the guardian angel for us, for Israel, for the church, if you will. When I say the church now, I mean the whole house of Israel, all of Israel, which includes Judah, and also includes the church and the Christian church. And Gavin's gotten mad at me lately. I am not upset at Christianity. I'm not at all. The parts that we get right, we've got tons of truth. And Judah has a bunch of truth. And you put them together and get rid of the nonsense, and we have full truth. And that's sort of my passion right now is spit out all the traditions and let's get back to just what the word says. So
well, absolutely. Here's a question from Montana. He or she says, how is it that the woman is the mother and the bride? Okay. That's interesting.
I would just say it just
is. Okay. Who was,
can I take this one? If you don't want to, Chris?
Wives.
Okay.
We'll just double back here.
Here's what I would suggest. When we're looking at this whole thing, right? First of all, a lot of these are, metaphors, analogies, and just they're not always. How should I put it? They're basically literary. Okay, doesn't mean they're not true, but they're literary devices used to talk about a particular people and what they're doing. All right, so remember that God and Israel get married back at Mount Sinai. That marriage turns kind of sour, and it doesn't work out so well, and all this stuff happens, right? So she goes from being this wonderful wife to now becoming an adulterous bride, adulterous wife, in fact, and then he divorces her. Okay, so we have that, and then he says he's going to take her into the wilderness, and he's going to woo her and bring her back to him. Well, so she goes from being that, and under that first marriage, she gave birth to the Messiah, right? Israel as a whole gave birth to the Messiah. And then when she becomes a new bride, because Jesus died for the wife, the adulterous wife, so that first marriage covenant would be over, then establishing a new marriage covenant. Okay. So if we understand that we're talking about a nation that, yes, was married, then this nation, quote unquote, gave birth to the Messiah, right? It was from her that the Messiah came. And then because of him, now there can be a new marriage contract so that he will then remarry or marry anew this new bride under the auspices of the new covenant. All right. So I hope that makes sense. I mean, Made sense in my mind. But yeah, Chris, did you want to follow up with on that?
Well, I think that it's comparable to the virgin birth. Actually, you have God who's basically fathering himself, and we have the Son. So yeah, I agree with you. Where you started out, Doug, it was really good. This is literary, you know. It all of the facets of it don't have to be locked down. In other words, it's not an analogy; it's more of a parable.
Yeah, fair enough. Joel Blackford has a question. He says, doesn't Isaiah 24:21 confirm a Mahom starting at the mountain's heights and up to the moon? And that seems to be where the watchers reside, right? Well, so if we go to Isaiah 24:21, it should come to pass in that day that the Lord will punish on high the host of exalted ones, and on the earth the kings of the earth. And just so people know here, the word Mahom, right? So you have that Seva Hamarom, right? So you have the army on high. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So Joel, here's how I interpret this passage, which is, they're going to be gathered together as prisoners are gathered into the pit. So this is talking about both the bad angels, okay, who work for Satan, right? He's going to punish those guys, and the bad kings on the earth, the kings of the earth, right? We see them in Revelation chapter 6, where they're like, oh no, we're in big trouble. It's the day of the Lord, right? So all of those guys, all of the kings of the earth and everybody on the earth who's coming to fight against Yeshua, in the day that the Lord comes back, he's going to gather them together as prisoners are gathered into the pit, right? Speaking of specifically here, the host on high, and they're going to be put into the abyss. That is going to be their share of where they're going to go for that time. So I'm not sure anything about a mountain's heights. I'm not quite sure what you're getting at, but Scott.
No, I put this. I think it's a good question, but because it actually kind of proves my understanding. So all the other verses are talking about the end of the age. Just verse 5 is about Yeshua's birth. And notice how I put emphasis there. What is the reason that only this verse is talking about an event that happened about 2033-ish years prior to the end of the age, gentlemen?
All right. So here's the deal. You can use a predicate to use as a descriptor of what somebody did. So I could say I was at the mall the other day and I saw the guy who walked on the moon, or I saw the guy who walked on the moon. Doesn't mean that I saw him at the moment walking on the moon, right? Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, but those two are the two guys who walked on the moon, right? So let me take you to a passage that would help us to understand that. Okay, so in Revelation chapter 20, okay, so here we are. So then I saw a great white throne and him who sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away. All right, so it doesn't mean that at the moment that John is seeing this, that is when heaven and earth fled away. So first of all, the question is, who is the one who's sitting on the throne? Well, is it God the Father or is it Jesus? It has to be Jesus. The Father said that he gave all authority and judgment to the Son. And we see in Matthew 25 that the Son of Man is going to come and he's going to sit on his throne and he's going to judge. All right. So it's the same judge. It's the same throne. The question is, when did heaven and earth flee away from him? Well, we know that. I mean, I don't think it's even complicated, right? We have this in Revelation chapter 6, right? I looked. Then the sky receded as a scroll when it's rolled up, right? We know that this is what's going to happen when Jesus comes back. 2 Peter 3:10 also tells us, the day of the Lord comes as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, right? So when Jesus comes back, this is when the heavens are going to recede like a scroll. Isaiah says in Isaiah 64, oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down. We see in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, when the Son of Man is revealed, right? Revealed, the word is revealed. He's unveiled, right? That's the whole unveiling. That's the whole concept of this veil between heaven and earth going away when Jesus comes back. That is what this is talking about. So there in Revelation chapter 20, that is not being used in a temporal sense, but it's being used in a descriptive sense. All right. So getting back to the question, I didn't forget the question. The question there is in Revelation chapter 12. So she bore a male child who was to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. Right. So this child who was to rule, right? So this is something that is yet future. He hasn't done that yet, but he's going to do that. Let's back up here, right? And so this dragon drew a third of the stars of heaven, threw them to the earth, and the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child as soon as born. So again, I would suggest that indeed did happen, that he did stand before, and it's, whether it happened or not, it's certainly a description of what the woman who the woman was going to give birth to and what the dragon intended to do. All right. So my point here is that these could be used less of a time reference, but more as a description of what this child is all about. Right. Again, the same thing as the one sitting on the throne, from whose face heaven and earth fled away. It wasn't happening at the moment that John was seeing it, but it was something that was descriptive of the person sitting on the throne. All right. So that would be my answer to that question.
Going back to, if I could, the question before from Joel and Isaiah 24, I don't know about the mountain idea there either, but I think maybe what he's getting at, what he was leading us to, is that this is the time when the earth is reeling, tottering, and at that time, this is the time that the hosts of heaven are apparently, this is parallel to what's happening there in Revelation 12. This casting down of the exalted ones, the kings of the earth gather together and put in a prison there, and it says after many days they will be punished. And so their judgment, their binding, just as Satan was bound there in the beginning of chapter 20 of Revelation, that's the same idea, that at this time of the really heavy destruction of the planet, that is when these hosts on high and the kings of the earth are bound. But not only that, Satan is bound at the same time. So I think maybe he was leading us to this verse in Isaiah 24 that kind of is a correlative passage to the same events there in Revelation 12.
Hey, can we go back just real quick before we end? I know we're getting close to Isaiah 66, verse 7.
Isaiah,
and let's maybe do a show on this. I'd love to have Chris back, and let's do a show on this passage, Isaiah 66, verse 7. And we've hit on it before, Doug, and we're going to read 7, 8, and 9 definitely. So before she was in labor, she gave birth. Before her pain came, so this is before tribulation, she delivered a male child. Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall the earth shall the earth be made to give birth in one day? Or shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion was in labor, she gave birth to her children. And then verse 9. Let's see. Yeah. Shall I bring to the point of birth, but not give delivery? Or shall I who gives delivery shut the womb, says your God? So again, there has been, I believe, major twisting or actually just cherry picking this verse and applying it to 1948, not reading the pretext. In other words, not reading the passages that come before that verse about a nation being born in a day, and then completely stopping and not reading any further But I believe this passage is where in Revelation 12, John is drawing from, receiving this vision of this male child. So maybe we table that and have a real detailed discussion, because it would dovetail nicely with what we're talking about tonight, and maybe even invite a fourth guest that might have some insight into this. If I can get in touch with Tony Robinson, I'm going to the Revive Hebrew Roots Conference thing up in Nashville next week. And I don't know if he's teaching, but if he might be there because he lives in Tennessee. So maybe we could I could wrangle him on for a guest, because he did a 4-part series on this. So on the chiastic structure of Revelation. And his conclusion, Doug, was Revelation 12 is the linchpin. In other words, if once you understand Revelation 12, then it's the linchpin, the trunk, the chiastic trunk from which the other parts of the themes in Revelation stem from. So pretty boring first part, but that's where he's laying the foundation. And then parts 2, 3, and 4 are more about dealing with the woman and the male child. So
okay, let's I just want to get to Joel's question real quick. Why not admit you can't solve Revelation 12 at this time? Why state that some of Revelation is figurative and some part literal? Is Satan also figurative? Well, Joel, I think we're working with the text. I will be the first to admit I don't have all the answers. Okay, but what I'm attempting to do is to give, to the very best of my ability, my understanding of how I see it. All right, so I don't have all the answers, but that's how I see it. So,
that would be a great example of what I talked about earlier. It's easy to sit behind the keyboard and take pot shots at and again, we've all been guilty of it before.
Sure.
On Facebook or social media, or even just chatting on this show. We're guilty at sniping at other people, but it is so much easier to do it, Joel and Gavin. Sitting over there behind your keyboards.
I think by having this discussion, we're admitting this is a controversial verse that needs discussion and looked at from different sides. And so I think that's why the verse was selected in the first place.
Exactly. Because it gives interesting conversation. All right. Well, thank you, guys. This was a fun conversation. And thank you, everybody out there, for your great questions. We appreciate you doing that. Please do make sure to subscribe, share, like it. It's great for the algorithm. And if you're enjoying this content, why not share it? And if you want to support this, you can go to patreon.com/Doug Hamp. Give as little as $2 or whatever you want to give is fine. If you want to be part of the Way Congregation, you can download our app, the Way Congregation app, available at the Google and Apple stores. So definitely check that out. And I hope you'll join us this coming Shabbat. We're going through the book of Judges, and we're going to look at another screw up, this guy named Jephthah, who he kind of made some mistakes, right? But that's good news, because if God can work with him, then he can work with me. So that's the good news. All right. Well, again, thank you, everybody, for joining us.